James Parker loved the isolation of his lakeside cabin, a place where the wind moved through the tall pines and the water carried reflections of a sky untouched by the noise of the world. He had bought the entire valley decades earlier, long before the HOA subdivision rose on the distant ridge, but he never bothered mentioning that fact to anyone. People tended to complicate things when they learned a man owned more land than they could fathom, and James preferred living quietly, far from arguments and attention. On a warm evening he sat on the edge of his dock, sipping coffee while the sun dipped beneath the tree-line. The peace broke when headlights appeared on the dirt road, followed quickly by the flash of blue emergency lights. Two sheriff's deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts as they approached cautiously. One of them spoke politely, explaining that a neighbor had reported suspicious activity at the cabin, claiming a trespasser might be living here without permission. James understood immediately who it must have been. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, had a reputation even he had heard about, despite avoiding interactions with the subdivision. She believed every square foot near the lake fell under her authority, and she was known for inserting herself into situations that had nothing to do with her. James remained calm as he invited the deputies inside and retrieved the thick folder containing his land documents. He spread the survey maps and ownership papers across his table, showing them clearly that not only did he own the cabin, but the surrounding forest, shoreline, and even the road they had driven on. The deputies exchanged looks of surprise, apologized for the interruption, and assured him the matter was resolved. James watched them leave, knowing soon trouble would come when Karen realized her assumptions held no power here. Word spread quickly through the subdivision that James had questioned Karen's authority, and by the end of the week, almost everyone had heard some version of the story. Some residents whispered excitedly, wondering if Karen had finally met someone she couldn't intimidate. Others kept their heads down, unwilling to get on her bad side. James, meanwhile, realized he could no longer avoid addressing the situation publicly. Karen's notices kept arriving, 3 more by midweek, each more aggressive than the last, filled with threats of escalating fines and legal consequences. He knew a direct conversation wasn't enough anymore. So when an invitation appeared in his mailbox, requesting his mandatory attendance at the HOA's monthly meeting, James made a decision. He would go, not to fight, but to end the misunderstandings once and for all. He spent the morning preparing, rolling up his large, official valley survey map and gathering the original deed that documented his ownership of thousands of acres. Everything was perfectly legal, recorded, and uncontested. When he entered the HOA community hall, conversations went silent. Karen stood at the front with her clipboard, jaw tight, eyes narrowed as if she had been waiting to pounce. Rows of homeowners sat in folding chairs, watching with a mix of curiosity and sympathy. Karen immediately launched into her speech, accusing James of violating community standards, ignoring notices, and disrespecting HOA authority. She spoke quickly and loudly, hoping to overwhelm him before he could respond. But James waited patiently until she finished. Then he unrolled the massive survey map across the table. Gasps rippled through the room as the boundaries became clear. His property encompassed the lake, the surrounding woods, the access road, and stretched far beyond their subdivision. He owned land that the HOA itself used daily. When he placed the official deed beside it, the room fell completely silent. Some board members leaned. Sarah spent the evening replaying the confrontation in her mind, realizing she could no longer treat Linda's actions as harmless overreach. Calling the police had crossed a line, and if Linda was willing to weaponize authority once, she would surely do it again. Determined to protect herself, Sarah brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sat at her desk, opening her laptop to begin researching everything she could about the HOA's bylaws, her deed, and the legal boundaries surrounding private property within an HOA community. It didn't take long for her to discover loopholes, outdated language, and vague clauses that Linda could easily twist to her advantage. But it also revealed protections that the HOA had no right to override. Still uneasy, she decided to consult a professional. The next morning she scheduled a meeting with a local attorney who specialized in property and HOA disputes. When she arrived at his office, the lawyer, Mr. Jennings, a calm, experienced man in his late 50s, listened carefully as she described the situation. The moment she explained the police visit, he raised his eyebrows and scribbled firm notes. After examining her documents, he confirmed that her pool was unquestionably private property, and that the HOA had absolutely no authority to commandeer it for meetings or community use. He even pointed out an overlooked clause in the HOA rules: any attempt to force access to a non-HOA owned property without written consent could expose the board to legal liability. Hearing this, Sarah felt a sense of relief mixed with a growing resolve. Mr. Jennings advised her to protect herself with documentation and transparency, suggesting she send a formal certified letter to the board, outlining her rights and warning them to cease any further attempts to pressure or intimidate her. That evening, Sarah drafted the letter with her lawyer's guidance, making every sentence firm, clear, and legally grounded. After sending it, she prepared a calm public post on. The community's reaction over the next few days revealed something Sarah hadn't anticipated. Many neighbors were tired of Linda's heavy-handed leadership but had been too nervous to speak up. Some quietly messaged Sarah to thank her for standing her ground, while others shared stories of similar overreach, demanding paint colors, unsolicited fines, and even surprise yard inspections. The more she heard, the more Sarah realized the neighborhood was divided, and that her situation had become a kind of symbol for everyone who felt pushed around. She didn't want to start a war, but she also didn't want people thinking she was hiding behind closed doors. If Linda was going to paint her as hostile or uncooperative, Sarah decided she would counter with openness and community spirit. That's when she came up with the idea of a neighborhood pool day, an informal welcome event, not official, not hosted by the HOA, and absolutely not something the board could claim control over. She printed small invitations and hand-delivered them to nearby homes, making sure to keep the tone friendly and inclusive. She purposefully delivered none to Linda or her closest allies. By the morning of the event, her patio was decorated with lanterns, music speakers were set up, and tables were filled with snacks and cool drinks. Children arrived first, splashing excitedly, followed by parents who seemed relieved to have a relaxed gathering without any HOA scrutiny. Laughter filled the backyard, and for a moment everything felt easy. But halfway through the afternoon, the gate rattled with a hard yank. Linda stood outside, arms crossed, wearing an expression that mixed outrage with forced authority. She demanded entry, claiming large gatherings required HOA notification and approval. A few neighbors overheard and stepped forward, reminding her that this was private property and she had no jurisdiction here. Linda tried to assert herself, but the crowd's united front left her momentarily speechless. The days following the pool incident were unusually quiet. Neighbors exchanged knowing looks whenever Linda passed by, and for once, she didn't stop to lecture anyone about lawn height or trash bins. Sarah suspected she was regrouping, perhaps planning her next attempt to reassert authority. But Sarah wasn't waiting for another ambush. With Mr. Jennings' help, she finalized a formal cease and desist letter addressed to the HOA board, outlining every violation Linda had committed: misuse of authority, harassment, attempted coercion, and unauthorized attempts to access private property. The letter was clear, factual, and backed by legal precedent. Copies were sent via certified mail, leaving a paper trail that couldn't be ignored. A week later, the HOA announced an emergency board meeting open to residents. Curiosity rippled through the neighborhood, and nearly everyone attended. Sarah sat near the front, calm and composed, while Linda appeared visibly tense, clutching a stack of papers and avoiding eye contact. When the meeting began, one of the board members, someone who had seemed timid before, stood and read a statement acknowledging that mistakes had been made. The board confirmed that Sarah's property was not, and had never been, an HOA amenity. They clarified that no private property could be used for official functions without explicit written consent. Then came the part no one expected: the board issued a formal apology to Sarah on the record. Linda's jaw tightened as murmurs filled the room. She was then asked to address the community. Her apology was stiff, forced, and barely met the definition of sincere, but the fact that she was required to make it spoke volumes. Several neighbors quietly applauded when she finished. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. The fear Linda once commanded was replaced by collective awareness that her authority had limits. That evening, Sarah returned home, lit a few soft lights around her pool, and finally relaxed, knowing